The morning they sold her, her mother wore her good blue dress. Nora Calloway stood outside the parlor door with her back pressed against the wallpaper, roses climbing toward a ceiling she had always found too low, and listened to her father pour whiskey for a man she had never met. The clink of glass, the satisfied exhale, then her father's voice, looser than usual, warm in the particular way it only became when he was getting something he wanted. "She's 24, which I'll admit isn't ideal," he said, "but she's strong, healthy, no consumption, no fits. You won't find a woman more capable of running a household if you can get her pointed in the right direction." A pause. The other man said nothing. Her father pushed on, the way he always did when silence made him nervous. "She's got opinions, I won't lie to you. More than's useful. But a man like you, out there on that mountain, you might actually want someone with a spine. Someone who won't fold the first hard winter." "What does she want?" the other man said. The question landed so strangely in the room that Nora straightened away from the wall. She had heard her father negotiate prices on cattle, on land, on the labor of men who had no other options. She had never once heard him asked to account for what the sold thing wanted. Her father laughed, and it was not a kind laugh. "That has never been the obstacle, Mr. Callum. The obstacle is that no man in this county wants to find out." More laughter then, from the other men in the room, her two brothers, her uncle. The sound of her family celebrating her removal the way they might celebrate the sale of a difficult horse. She stood in the hallway and let it move through her, that sound, and she thought, "Remember this. Whatever comes next, remember you heard this clearly. No illusions, no softening it later into something easier to carry." She had always been better at hard truths than comfortable ones. It was apparently her central failing. She turned and walked upstairs to begin packing. The road to Callum's mountain took 2 days by wagon, and Nora spent most of it watching the land change. The flat propriety of the valley, its fenced fields, its painted church steeples, gave way by degrees to something older and less managed. Ponderosa pines thick as cathedral columns, rock faces bearing themselves to the sky without apology. The air thinned and sharpened, and she found, to her own surprise, that she breathed easier in it. The man driving the wagon was Callum's foreman, a weathered Mexican named Alejandro, who had introduced himself with a slight bow and asked, without any of the awkward ceremony the situation seemed to demand, whether she preferred to ride up front or in the bed. She had chosen up front. He had nodded as though this confirmed something. They did not speak much, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. He pointed out a hawk circling above the tree line. She asked what kind, and he told her, "A ferruginous hawk, rare this far west. Good luck by some accounts." She watched it until it was gone. Callum's ranch came into view at dusk on the second day, and it was not what she had imagined. She had prepared herself for something grim, a bachelor's neglect, a building that looked like the man her father had described, powerful and reclusive and unknowable. Instead, she found a long, low house built from dark timber, with a covered porch running its full length and 2 dogs sleeping in the last stripe of sunlight on the steps. Behind it, a barn, well-maintained. Beyond that, pasture running up toward a tree line so green it looked painted. It was beautiful, and that frightened her more than grimness would have. Callum himself was waiting on the porch. He was taller than she'd expected, broader, with the kind of stillness that comes not from passivity, but from a settled relationship with one's own weight in the world. Dark hair, a short beard, hands that hung at his sides without fidgeting. He watched the wagon come up the road without moving, and when Alejandro brought it to a stop, he came down the porch steps and offered his hand to help her down. She took it. His grip was firm and brief. "Miss Calloway," he said, "I'm glad you came." "I didn't have a great many options," she said, because she had decided on the drive up that she would not pretend with this man. If it offended him, better to know it now. He looked at her steadily. Something moved in his expression that she could not immediately name. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you did. Come inside. There's food." He told her over supper, a simple meal, venison stew and bread, eaten at a table that could have seated 10, but held only the 2 of them, that he had not paid her father the bride price. She set down her spoon. "He'll have told you I agreed to pay it," Callum said. He was not looking at her with apology or appeasement. He was looking at her the way she had noticed him looking at most things, directly, without the performance of casualness. "I did not agree. I told him I would see you settled and provided for, and that if this arrangement suited you, I would continue to do so. I told him I would not pay a price for a person." Nora was quiet for a moment. Outside, the night was pressing itself against the windows, and the stove was warm, and one of the dogs had come inside and was lying beside the door with its chin on its paws. "He'll be furious," she said. "Yes. He may come up here." "I expect so." She looked at her hands, then at him. "Why did you agree to this at all, then? If not for the arrangement as he understood it?" Callum was quiet for a moment, not in the way of a man deciding whether to lie, but in the way of a man deciding how much truth to offer. "I had reasons," he said finally. "I'll tell you what they are, but not tonight. Tonight you're tired, and you've had a long 2 days, and I think the reasons will land better when you're rested." It was such a sensible answer that she almost laughed. "All right," she said. "There's something else I want to say tonight, though," he said. "You're not a prisoner here. You're not obligated to stay. I'm asking you for 1 month, to see the ranch, to see what the work is, to decide for yourself whether this is a life you could want. At the end of a month, if you want to leave, I'll give you a horse and enough money to go somewhere your family can't follow. A real somewhere. Not back to them." She stared at him. In 24 years, no one had offered her a real somewhere. "And if I stay," she said. "Then we build something," he said simply. "Together. I won't tell you what it looks like. That's the part we'd figure out." She picked up her spoon again. "Ade." The stew was very good. 1 month, she said. 1 month, he agreed. She learned the ranch the way she had always learned things that mattered to her, by refusing to be kept at the edges of it. The first morning she was up before Callum and found the kitchen and made coffee because she needed to be doing something with her hands and because standing in the middle of someone else's house feeling like a guest in her own life was a feeling she had decided she was finished with. When he came downstairs and found the coffee already made, he paused in the doorway, and she thought he might say something about it. Something about a woman's place or how things were done here. But he only took a cup and said, "The hands eat at 6. Alejandro'll show you the outbuildings if you want the tour." So she took the tour. The ranch ran cattle, 140 head, with a smaller operation in horses, working stock mostly, though Callum had 3 Appaloosas he was breeding with careful attention and clear pride. There were 6 hands, including Alejandro, a cook named Bess, who was somewhere in her 50s and seemed to find Nora's presence deeply amusing, and 2 young brothers from a family 2 valleys over who were learning the work and had the round-eyed, perpetually surprised look of people who had recently discovered they were capable of more than they'd been told. Within a week, Nora had reorganized the supply room, which had been organized with the logic of a man who could always find what he was looking for because he'd put it there himself and therefore systematized nothing. Bess watched her do it without comment for 2 days and then said, "Took me 4 years to talk him into buying a second canning jar shelf," in a tone of mild outrage. 4 years, Nora said. "He's not a fast mover," Bess said. "On some things." It was said with a meaningful inflection that Nora chose not to investigate. She found, as the days moved forward, that the work was not what she had expected, not because it was easier, but because it fit her in the specific way that a tool fits a hand shaped exactly for it. She had spent her whole life in rooms where the correct behavior was to want less, be quieter, take up less space. Here the space needed filling. The ranch was large and demanding and perpetually in conversation with itself. A fence that needed repairing, a calf that needed watching, a negotiation with the land that required constant attention and adjustment, and the willingness to be wrong and try differently. She was very good at being wrong and trying differently. It had never been valued before. She rode out with Alejandro to check the eastern fence line on the 9th day, and he told her, as they worked their way along the posts, that he had been with Callum for 11 years. "He's a fair man," Alejandro said, with the directness of someone who had decided she could be trusted with this. "Hard to know but fair. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean." "He said he'd tell me why he did this," Nora said. "Why he chose me." "He hasn't yet." Alejandro glanced at her sideways, a small expression playing at the corners of his mouth. "He'll tell you," he said, "when he's ready." "Is he always this slow?" "I told you," Alejandro said. "On some things." He told her on the 14th day, which was a Tuesday, which she would remember with strange specificity for the rest of her life. They were on the porch in the evening, which had become a habit neither of them had decided to establish. The light was going pink and gold over the ridge, and she had her feet up on the porch rail the way she had not allowed herself to do for the first week, and he was sitting in the other chair with his hat on his knee. She had noticed that he sat with his hat on his knee when he was going to say something real. 3 years ago, he said, I was in Millhaven buying winter supplies. Millhaven, the town where she had grown up. There was a man, he said. Old man. Worked for Hartwell's dry goods. I don't know if you remember Hartwell. He paused. He was accusing the man of stealing. There was a crowd. Nobody was doing anything. Nora went very still. There was a woman, Callum said. Young woman, well-dressed. She walked right into the middle of it and asked Hartwell to show his evidence, and when he couldn't, she said, and I remember this exactly. She said, You're accusing this man because you think nobody will question you, and that is the most cowardly thing I have ever witnessed in public. Nora remembered. She remembered the old man's face, the way he'd been shaking. She remembered thinking that someone had to say something, and that apparently someone was going to be her, and that there would be consequences, and she found she could not make herself care about the consequences. Hartwell backed down, Callum said. The crowd dispersed. The old man, I found out later his name was Gilbert. He worked for Hartwell 12 years. He didn't lose his job. I don't know that she knew that part. She walked away before anyone could tell her. A long silence. The pink light deepened. I asked who she was, Callum said. I was told she was one of the Calloway girls. The difficult one. He paused. I thought about it for 3 years. What it takes to do that. To see something wrong and walk into it when no one else will, when you're the one who'll pay for it and do it anyway. Nora's throat was tight. When your father sent a letter, Callum said, I recognized the name. She looked at him then, and he was looking at the ridge the way he often did, not as avoidance, but as though the distance helped him say the thing straight. I want to be clear, he said. This isn't a debt. I'm not trying to repay you for a good deed. I thought that whoever she was, she deserved a place where that quality was wanted, not corrected. The dog on the porch steps lifted its head and looked at the tree line, then settled back down. The first stars were appearing. You waited 3 years, she said. I didn't know how to find you otherwise, he said, without going to your family, which I was not going to do. But then you did go to my family. Then your father found me, he said, something dry moving through his voice. He had a list of daughters he was interested in placing. I only wanted to know if one particular name was on it. Nora looked at her hands in the dimming light. She was thinking about the old man Gilbert and his shaking hands, and how she had walked home afterward with her heart hammering, and her mother had told her she had embarrassed the family, and she had eaten dinner alone in her room and thought, it was still right. Even now, it was still right. She had not known someone was watching. She had not known it mattered to anyone but Gilbert. I don't know what to do with this, she said finally. You don't have to do anything with it, Callum said. I'm not telling you so you'll feel obligated. I'm telling you because you asked, and because you deserve to know why you're here, and because I don't intend to have a single thing between us that's a secret. That last part hit her somewhere beneath the sternum. Not one thing, she said. Not one thing, he said. Her father arrived on the 21st day. She saw the dust from the road before she could make out the riders, and something in her chest recognized the particular shape of the approaching problem, the way a body recognizes cold before the mind has caught up. She set down the fence post she was carrying and watched, and when she could make out her father's gray horse, she was surprised to find that she felt less afraid than she had expected. Less afraid, in fact, than she had felt in her father's house, where the threat was ambient, diffuse, present in every room. She walked down to meet him at the gate. He had brought her uncle and one of her brothers, and a man she didn't recognize who had the look of someone paid to lend credibility. They all pulled up short when they saw her come through the gate alone, in work clothes, with the easy carriage of someone who has spent 3 weeks doing physical labor and found it agreeable. You look like a ranch hand, her father said. Good, she said. That's what I am at the moment. He dismounted. He was trying to project authority, but something in his eyes was working hard, recalibrating, because she was not standing the way she used to stand in front of him. She was standing the way she'd stood in front of Hartwell 3 years ago, feet planted, hands loose at her sides, ready for the thing to go badly and prepared not to back down anyway. You're coming home, he said. He hasn't paid what we agreed. He didn't agree, Nora said. He was quite clear with you, apparently, about what he would and wouldn't do. You heard what you wanted to hear. He has an obligation. To whom? She said. Not to me. He's given me more consideration in 3 weeks than you have in 24 years. She watched her father's face tighten. I'm not coming home. You're not yet married to him. You have no legal—
Then I'll stay as his housekeeper, she said calmly.
Or I'll take the horse he offered me and go somewhere else entirely. Those are the options. Coming home with you is not among them. Her father stared at her for a long moment. The man she didn't recognize shifted in his saddle. You think he's going to stand by you? Her father said, and there was something ugly in his voice now, something that had always been there underneath the ordinary tones of family life. You think he's going to choose you over the goodwill of this county? I think he's already demonstrated what he chooses, she said. And I'm not asking him to choose me. I'm choosing myself. Her father left without getting what he came for. She watched the dust settle and felt very clearly like someone who had set down a weight they had been carrying so long they'd forgotten they were holding it. Callum was arrested on the 26th day. The charges were fabricated, a claim of cattle theft filed by a man named Greaves who was a business associate of her father's and who had, as Alejandro quietly informed her, about as many actual cattle as the average kitchen. The county sheriff was a political creature and owed her father several useful favors, and the result was that Callum was in a cell in the valley town of Crane by nightfall, with a hearing scheduled for a week out, and no guarantee the week would be treated as the formality it should have been. Nora stood in the kitchen and felt the shape of the problem and thought, someone has to do something. Apparently that someone was going to be her. She left before dawn on the Appaloosa. Callum was proudest of, the gray one with the dark mane, the one he had let her ride twice in the past 2 weeks with the careful attentiveness of someone sharing something precious. And she rode down the mountain in the dark with a lantern and a saddlebag that contained 3 things. A record book Alejandro had given her, documenting every head of cattle on the ranch by date, acquisition price, and brand. A letter written in her own clear hand addressed to the territorial judge who she had determined through 4 hours of evening research had both jurisdiction over this county and a documented antagonism toward the current sheriff going back 2 years. And the absolute conviction that she was not going to let this be the way the story went. She arrived in Crane at mid-morning. She went first to the judge's office, not the courthouse. She had enough sense to go to the man before going to the institution. She waited 40 minutes on a hard bench outside his door, and when she was shown in, she stood in front of his desk and said, clearly and without preamble, "My name is Nora Calloway. I have evidence that the cattle theft charges against Thomas Callum were filed by a man who has no cattle, as a favor to my father, who is attempting to coerce me into returning to his household. I need you to look at this record book, and I need you to send someone to verify Greaves's stock, and I need you to understand that if you wait a week on this, it will be because you have decided that a woman's right to determine her own life is less important than the business relationships of men who benefit from keeping her without one." The judge looked at her for a long moment over the top of his glasses. "Sit down, Miss Calloway," he said. "Let me see the book." Callum was released by 4 o'clock. The charges were dismissed. Greaves was informed by the judge's clerk that a formal inquiry into the filing of false reports was being initiated. The sheriff was made aware, in terms that left him in no doubt, that his continued tenure in the role was under review. Nora was waiting in the street outside the jail when Callum came out. He stopped on the steps when he saw her. The afternoon light was doing something generous to everything, the way it sometimes did in the late-going part of the day in the high country, turning the dust gold and the shadows long, and the ordinary world briefly cinematic. He looked at her for a long moment. "The Appaloosa, all right?" he said. "Perfect," she said. He came down the steps and stopped in front of her. He was not a man who touched casually or spoke without meaning it, and so when he reached out and took her hand, briefly, and held it, she understood exactly what it meant. "You rode down the mountain alone," he said. "Someone had to," she said. "You could have sent Alejandro." "I could have," she said. "I didn't want to." He looked at her with the particular directness she had come to recognize as his version of saying the thing he could not quite say with words yet, and she understood it the way you understand a landscape you have been living in, not all at once but gradually, until one day you realize you know it completely. "Let's go home," he said. They married on the 31st day, which was 1 day past the month he'd asked for, but which felt, to both of them, like the correct amount of time. Bess made a cake. Alejandro wore his good hat. The two young brothers from the neighboring valley stood in the yard with the slightly stunned expressions they'd been wearing since the cattle theft affair, which had apparently elevated Nora to a status somewhere between capable ranch manager and folk legend in their estimation. The judge who had dismissed the charges sent a letter, which was formal and official, and also, in its final paragraph, contained a sentence that seemed designed for no legal purpose whatsoever, except to wish them well. Her father sent nothing. She had expected nothing. And she found it arrived exactly as expected, without weight, without consequence, without the power to alter the day. Callum had written her a letter, which he handed to her the morning of the wedding, with the hat-on-the-knee stillness and a particular look in his eyes that she had come to recognize as the sign that he was about to say something true. She read it in the kitchen while Bess made noise deliberately in the supply room to give her privacy. It was not a long letter. It said, in the careful hand of a man who was better with actions than with words and who was doing his best with both. I am not good at this. But I want you to know that what you did in Millhaven, and what you did last week, and what you do every day in the quiet ways I think you don't believe anyone notices. I notice. I have always noticed. I think you have spent a long time in places where noticing you correctly was beyond their capacity. I want to spend the rest of my life being exactly that capacity. She stood in the kitchen with the letter in her hands and felt something come loose in her chest that had been wound tight for a very long time. The dog came and put its chin on her knee. "All right," she told it. "All right." The ceremony itself was small and exact, the way things were when they were true. The territorial judge who had freed Callum was willing to make the ride up the mountain and officiate, and he did so with the brevity of a man who understood that the words were secondary to the fact of the two people saying them. She wore the same good dress she'd arrived in and thought of the last time she had put it on. 2 days before, packing in her childhood room, listening to the sound of her family being relieved of her. She had chosen to wear it today because she believed in the usefulness of comparison, in knowing exactly how far you'd come from where you started. She said the words and meant them. She thought, this is what it is to be a person in a place that knows what you are. Not managed, not corrected, not sold. Known. When it was done and Bess was cutting the cake with the efficiency of a woman who had been patient about this for a month and was finished being patient, Callum came to stand beside her at the porch railing and looked out at the land the way he always did. The ridge going blue-green in the afternoon, the cattle moving at the edge of the far pasture, the hawk, she had seen it twice more since the first day, and Alejandro had said it had nested somewhere in the high rocks above the tree line, which she took as evidence of something she couldn't quite name. "What are you thinking?" he said. She had thought about this question, actually, what she would answer when he asked it, because he was the kind of man who asked it and meant it, who actually wanted to know. She had spent 24 years in a family that asked how she was and needed her to say fine. She had married a man who would wait out the silence to find out what was actually true. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that I have spent my whole life being described as a problem. Too much, too loud, too stubborn, too unmanageable." She paused. "And I'm thinking that it turns out those are only problems in places that can't use them." He was quiet for a moment. "This place can use them," he said. "I know," she said. "I know." The hawk was a dark shape circling above the ridge, easy and unhurried in the high air, and the light was doing its evening gold on everything, and somewhere behind them, Bess was laughing at something Alejandro said, and the two young brothers were chasing one of the dogs through the yard with a piece of cake, and the land ran up to the tree line and kept going, and for the first time in her life, Nora Calloway, Nora Callum, stood in the middle of a place and felt it hold her, felt the specific way that a place holds you when it was always meant to be yours, and thought, here, this is the word I have been looking for. This is what it means to belong somewhere. She leaned slightly against his arm. He leaned back. The hawk turned once more above the mountain and was gone.